morning, everybody, to yet another virtual meeting of Heritage Oakville. It's wonderful to see you all giving up such a lovely sunny day now that the weather seems to have improved. I'd like once again to thank all of the staff members who put together this meeting. There's a lot of backroom work goes on, and particularly today when we have delegations, which is good to see because there's a lot of management of the delegation process. And we have 3 registered delegations today, as well as the applicant, of course. And we've also, I should remind everybody that delegations have 10 minutes to speak. The clerk will manage your time and will bring you on when you want to speak, and will tell you when your 10 minutes are closing and when they're up. And then you will have the opportunity to answer questions if the committee puts them to you. There's a telephone number, 905-815-6095, for anyone who loses connection and wants to get back in again, or anyone who's actually watching on YouTube where this is being broadcast. If they would like to get a copy of the agenda, you can get that at oakville.ca so that you're at least able to look at the same written materials that we're dealing with. The committee members, as usual, will be muted during the course of the meeting, and if you wish to speak, you just raise your hand. I'll keep a speaking list, and then I'll ask you to get in. I'll then remind everybody that we are an advisory committee, that it's actually council that makes the decisions, and the next meeting of the Planning and Development Council is Monday, June the 7th at 6:30 p.m. Okay, seeing a full house, we have no regrets, so we can move into the next item on the agenda, which is a declaration of pecuniary interest. Does anyone have a declaration of pecuniary interest to make with respect to any of the items on the agenda this morning? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item, which is the confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting. These were distributed. Are there any comments, errors, or omissions? Somebody, Councillor Dunnock, makes the motion to approve the minutes as distributed. Anyone opposed to that? Seeing none, the minutes are approved. We have 2 discussion items on the agenda today. And the first one, item 4.1, concerns the application for demolition and construction of new additions at 176 Front Street. Now, yeah, she is. It's Carolyn's. This is Carolyn's show. So, Carolyn, off you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just wait for the PowerPoint to come up. So, as you all know, this property is located on Front Street along the lakeshore. It is included in the 1st and 2nd Street Heritage District. And I'll show you the next slide has the location map. Again, just east of the park along Front Street on the lake. Next. So the property is is designated as part of the Old Oakville Heritage District and contains the circa 1837 James McDonald House, which is the 2-story portion of the house. And there are multiple additions that have been added to over the years, which I'll get into in a bit. The current application is to restore the 2-story historic home and to demolish 3 non-historic wings around the house and construct 4 new wings. And finally, as well as to add a second driveway on the west side of the property. In terms of process, this property and proposal has already gone through the site plan approval process. So this process was conducted and gone through the planning services department and has been supported. And secondly, there was a minor variance application which went through to the committee of adjustment, which was approved recently as well. So this is the 3rd step in the process, which is heritage permit approval. Next. So the restoration of the historic house, this involves restoring the stucco where necessary, the wood windows, wood shutters. The one change that is being proposed is to the rear of the house, and this is to add new 2nd-story dormers on the roof line at the rear of the house. So secondly, it's to demolish 3 non-historic wings. So there are attached garages on the east side of the house. One we believe was built around 1941, and then subsequently in 1965, a second one was built to the east of that, and some alterations were made to the 1940s portion when the 1960s bit was added. On the rear of the house, the westerly side, there is a one-story rear wing they're proposing to remove. This was mostly done in 1987. There was a small portion closest to the house that was likely 1940s, we believe. Again, this is a little small piece next to the house, but most of the addition was extended and redone in 1987. And then as well, there's a 1987 one-story rear wing to the east of that one, which I believe there was an addition put on there in 1941 as well, but this was completely redone in 1987. So the existing wing that you see there was 1980s. And then finally, the construction of 4 new wings. So the one-story single-car garage and living space is proposed for the footprint of the existing garages on the east side. So because of Conservation Authority restrictions and requirements, the owners were required for the most part to keep to the existing footprints of the wings that are surrounding the 2-story house. So this new living space and single-car garage will replace the existing double garage on the same footprint. Secondly, a one-story living space on the footprint of the existing westerly rear wings. That's the 1987 one on the west. It will be a new one replacing that. Thirdly, a one-story single-car garage to the west of the historic house. So this is a new footprint, but essentially takes about the size of the existing footprint of the easterly rear wing and replaces it on the west side of the house. And finally, a shallow one-story glazed extension along the rear of the historic house. This is very minimal. It's more just like windows going along the back of the house, but I've included it here in the wings just to make sure we've captured it. The rear of the house along the first story was opened up through the 1987's addition. So the idea is that this would fill in that space. Next. And finally, the existing driveway to the garage on the east side of the property is proposed to be reduced, and instead a new driveway would be added on the west side of the property for the new single-car garage. And this new garage and driveway would require the removal of 2 existing coniferous trees. There were the following minor variances that were approved by the Committee of Adjustment. The first is to permit 2 attached garages, whereas the bylaw only allows for a maximum of 1 attached garage per dwelling. Secondly, a garage setback of 5.24 meters, whereas a minimum of 5.7 meters is required. And thirdly, a front yard setback of 5.24 meters for the westerly garage, which is essentially the same as the point above, and a front yard setback of 1.43 meters for the easterly garage, which of course is an existing whereas the bylaw requires a minimum front yard setbacks of 6 meters. So just take you around the house, showing photos of the existing house, and I've just included a little bit here from the district plan. That was an image of the house taken in the 1980s, and a little blurb on James MacDonald, who is a Scottish carpenter who built the house. So this is the front of the house. You can see the existing attached garage on the left-hand side. Next. This is the showing to the west of the house towards the park. You can see the fenced area there. This is where the new garage is proposed to be set back from the front of the house. And the 2 spruces that would be removed are shown there for the new driveway. Next. This is coming around to the westerly side. So the overhang, the little stoop that you see there with the door, that would still remain, and the new addition for the garage would be set back behind that. And then to the right, you can see the addition that was mostly done in the 1980s. Again, a small portion on the left-hand side, we believe to be 1940s, which was extended in the 1980s. Next. This is coming back around to the back of that 1980s edition, and you can see the other 1980s edition to the right. Next. And we're just coming back around towards the east now, and you can see, again, that rear 1987 edition behind the picnic table. And then to the right, you can see the 1940s and 1960s garage wings that were added to the house. Next. And this is showing it from the east. You can see there are some terraced gardens here leading down to the lake, and a lot of green area to the east of the house. Again, with Conservation Authority requirements, a lot of this is all remaining. So these gardens will remain, and the green areas and space to the east of the house will remain. Really what we're looking at is replacement of existing footprints for the most part. Next. And this is just showing the existing streetscape to the east of the house. As you can see, there's a bit of a low stone wall with the picket fence. The idea is to keep the picket fence here. And I should note, and we'll point out this later in the presentation, that a portion of the white picket fence will need to be replaced and moved a little bit because some of it is on town property. So again, this view showing here will remain the same because those trees will be maintained. And this is coming around the front, again, the two garages that are proposed to be removed. Next. So we've got the site plan here. Most of you will have seen this in the agenda. This is a little bit difficult to see because this is obviously quite a large plan. It's a very large property because it includes the lands going down to the water. Again, you can see to the east of the house is a lot of green space with mature trees, and those are to be retained. So on the next slide, we'll zoom in a little bit closer. So again, in the center, you can see the dark shaded portion. This is the existing two-story stucco heritage house. And to the east in the lighter gray is the footprint of the existing two garages, which is proposed to be replaced with single car garage to the right with a new driveway you can see. And the rest of the portion would be a covered entryway and living space. And then to the left of the two-story house, you can see the proposed new one-car garage. And to the right of that below in the lighter gray is the new addition replacing the 1987 wing. And you can also see the dotted line to the right of that of the 1980s wing to be replaced. And the proposal includes a new terrace there. And just above that, you can see a long, thin strip. This is the glazing portion that I referred to earlier in terms of the new wing. Again, not really a wing, but just a glazed section that connects all of the new additions. Next. Here's an elevation view from the street. So we have the two-story stucco house to be restored. And on either side, we have the two one-story wings. So on the left-hand side, you can see it's built into the ground the way the grading changes. So it's the one story is lower than the first story of the house. On the east side, it's raised up a little bit just because of the grading. On the left-hand side, you can see there's the one-car garage door and then the entryway, the covered entry that will provide access into the house. The idea is that it's sort of a covered porch. There is a window well in the roof of that, so it would be lit up. On the roof of these new wings would be a green roof. So the idea is to provide a bit of softening through greenery. The proposal includes lake stone cladding, so actual salvaged lake stone, which of course is typical for the area, mostly used in garden walls, in some buildings as cladding, and foundation walls, etc. The part of this proposal also includes a low garden wall or planter, I guess you could call it, connecting the two new wings in front of the house. So that would be added onto the front of the house as a landscaping feature. And again, all of the original windows and pieces of the existing house are to be restored, and a new cedar shingle roof is proposed for the historic house. Next. Oh, just go back one slide. I missed one thing. Another additional part of the landscaping on the left side of the house is to include a new street tree and some landscaping in front of that entry porch. Again, to limit the amount of asphalt and space in front of there, to make sure that what you see today in terms of a double driveway would be reduced to a single driveway with new landscaping and a pedestrian walkway with a new tree. Next. Coming around to the westerly side, again, you can see the stoop and the entry door in the house to be retained, and the new single car garage is set farther back. Through the site plan process, one of the requirements was to include more trees because of the loss of the two spruce trees here. I'll get a bit more details on that in the landscape plan, but these trees that you see proposed here are actually required as part of the site plan approval. So you can see there's a lot of landscaping along here, along this side, which does face the park to the west. And you can see the rest of the rear wing addition heading out back here, which is the 1987's wing. And portions of these, again, are clad in stone. The proposal is the idea behind the applicant's perspective is to create a feeling of a stone garden wall. Next. This is the rear. A bit difficult to see here because it's all showing on one plane because it's an elevation drawing. The renderings show it a bit better, but there's mostly proposed in the back is large sections of glazing and some wood paneling sections behind the house. You can also see the dormers proposed at the rear of the existing house. And larger sections of glazing like this are not typically permitted in the front of the house, but it's been quite commonly supported in the heritage districts on properties at the rear, especially on properties that are facing the lake, because they're not really visible from within the heritage district for the most part. Next. So coming around to the east side, you can see the single car garage to the right with the stone cladding and the green roof. And you can see more of the glazing and the wood siding on the one-story wing to the back of the house. Next. Here's some floor plans to show a little bit. We won't get into all the details, but it just shows a little bit more the covered entryway. If you look to the top right of the image, you can see the covered entryway in the window well there and how it connects to the single car garage and into the house. And you can see the two single driveways and the landscaping as well as the walkway. Next. This is the second floor plan. Again, all of the new wings are just one story. So the original two-story house will remain the only two-story portion on the property. Next. This is the roof plan. For the most part, you can see just showing the new dormers that are going in the existing house and the roofs of the new addition. Again, these are the fence, more of the landscaping details. So the existing fence, particularly on the west side of the property where it is in the park, the actual fence is located within the town's parkland. So this actually needs to be removed and moved to the east. The existing fence itself, while traditional look and materials, is not actually old. So staff has supported its removal and replacement within the property line. So it will look as the existing fence does, a typical white wood picket fence. The middle image that you see there is actually the gate. There is an existing gate that goes down to the water. This provides access from the park down to the water, especially if the town needs to access that. Again, that is the water's edge along there is privately owned. So the third fence that you can see at the bottom is a metal fence. A portion of that will be included down towards the water. This is just to ensure that people are not accessing the private property from along the lake when they're in the park. Again, through site plan approval, the removal of 2 trees was approved. And as part of this, 13 new trees, the new trees were required, and so 13 new trees are being proposed to be planted on the property. And this provides a 51% canopy coverage on the property versus the 20% required. And the list of trees are included there in that slide. Next. This is a landscape plan. Again, difficult to see since it's a larger property, but generally you can see a lot of existing trees to remain and new trees to be planted, and all of the terraced gardens and planting that go down towards the lake and to the east of the house to remain. Next. Here are the renderings showing the property, which gives a better idea and view of what we're seeing rather than the elevation drawings. So again, you can see the stone planters connecting the 2 new additions with the green roofs. Next. This is the view from the park. Again, a lot of the existing landscaping would still be there in terms of some of the shrubs and trees. And new plantings to be done to provide, again, more of a softening between the new addition and the park. Next. This is coming back down to the rear. So the left-hand side that you see is the single car garage, and the right is the westerly rear addition. Next. And again, this gives you a better idea of how far back those new additions are coming. So the left-hand side is replacing the 1980s addition, and where that red tree is where the existing other 1980s addition is to be removed. And then that glazed section behind the heritage house is that very shallow piece that's going to be proposed to be added to connect to the easterly addition. Next. So this is a view from the southeast showing the lower portion, which is the garage and the stone cladding, and the higher portion there in the glazed cladding. Next. And this is coming up from the street. Again, you can see the new tree that's been proposed, and you can see the stone of the new garage wing. You can also see from this perspective, the stone has been carried into the interior of that covered porch, which again has a window well, so it's actually sort of open and at the top in terms of the light coming in. And oh yeah, next, that's fine. This is just a closer up view. So a previous proposal that was presented to the Heritage Committee in December of last year had a much wider driveway, more consistent with what's on the property now. And it also had an opening for the entryway that was the same size as the garage door. So it appeared more as two garage doors, even though one was actually an entryway. So the applicants have widened that entryway to make it appear less like a garage door, less like a garage bay. The other thing that was done was added the addition of the tree and the landscaping and the walkway away from the driveway to ensure that people aren't going to use the walkway to park a car because it's not wide enough. Next. This is just showing the existing, so showing the existing view of the heritage house. So typically from a heritage perspective, we do like to see materials and design for new wings to be distinguishable from. So in this case, they kept the same look in terms of the white and the black, and it's a 1.5 car garage and a 1 car garage. So it's really almost sort of a 2.5 car garages that are proposed there. And the idea is to replace this with 1 single car garage in this location and to change the rest into living space with the covered entryway. The new additions will also have a lower roof line. The current one juts higher up into the existing house. If you go back to the last slide, one other thing is the addition of 2 wood windows in the heritage house. So again, those will be to replicate what's on the rest of the house, to provide more lighting there. We're not sure if there were windows here traditionally. It would have made sense and could very well been the case. And they may have been covered up or removed when the garage additions were added. Next. So we'll skip to the next one. Again, this is a view of what the Heritage Committee had previously seen with the 2 matching bays, even though one was not a garage door, and the wide driveway. So this just shows some of the changes that were done on that, that section. Next. Again, these are images the applicant sent with showing some of the lake stone that they are proposing. They would like the material to be looking like that. This is something that's been a very significant concern for staff in terms of getting any stone material right in the Heritage District, and is always a concern for any property. It's not something that is always feasible in terms of getting actual salvaged lake stone, since it's hard to come by these days. I understand the applicants do have a possibility for getting the historic lake stone. From our perspective, we would want to see it actually be salvaged lake stone so that it actually appears like the images that you see before you. If that couldn't be possible, we'd want to see some kind of stone from somewhere that matches as close as possible. But really, the idea from staff's perspective would be to see traditional salvaged lake stone used. Next. So I'm just going to go over some of the comments that were made by the Heritage Committee in December. This is sort of recaps most of them. I haven't written every single specific one with all the details, but tried to encapsulate the overall comments that were put through. So the first one is that some use of stone would be complementary, but the proposed stone walls put too much emphasis on the additions. And similar point, the next one, the two garages flanking the building, each side creates a focus on the garages. From staff's perspective, I think a lot of the focus still remains on the 2-story historic home, just because it is a lot taller. It's a different material. And the other thing that was done by the applicants was to soften these new additions by adding a green roof and more landscaping, so that it takes away some of the, maybe the potentially harsher look of having the stone walls. And again, if it was a newer, larger blocks of manufactured stone, we would have more concern. The smaller, more rustic lake stone would hopefully have a softer look as well. Thirdly, the stone planting wall helps ground the house in the new additions, so that has remained. The contemporary rear additions are supported because they're not easily visible from the street. Again, staff's perspective on rear additions isn't to say you can do whatever you want because it can't be visible, but there has been always a bit more latitude and flexibility given in terms of providing more glazing for rear yards, especially those on the lake. Maintain the iconic white picket fence, that is to be done. Not enough balance and transition between the old and new, and too much contrast between the two. Again, the owners have attempted to do some changes to again soften the old and the new portions together, and hopefully ground it with the stone planter in front. Again, I think some of the older renderings did appear more harsher. With lake stone, it wouldn't necessarily actually appear that way. Mass and scale of the additions is compatible with the heritage house in the area. Staff do agree with this one. I mean, they are 1 story. The existing 2-story house is higher up, and even the proposed addition to the east is lower than 1 story because of the grading. So the existing large white house remains the prominent feature on the site. Need more refinement in the materials used in the new addition. There were some changes made in terms of refining some of the edges of the new additions and adding the green roof. Soften the garage on the park side with landscaping or design changes to maintain the pastoral feel of the park. So again, this was done and required through the site plan process in terms of adding more trees. And ideally build 1 east garage and not the west garage. So, and the applicant can speak to this further, but my understanding is that from the town's perspective, we wanted to have a driveway that was deeper that can actually accommodate 1 car. The existing driveway, when the cars are parked there, they're actually in the town property. So the westerly garage is set back farther, which actually provides 1 car parking space within the property. It's a challenging site because the house is located so close to the street. It's also a narrow street there. So this allows them a bit more flexibility in terms of getting a car parked within the site. Next. So in addition to the Heritage District plan for the Old Oakville District, staff also uses the standards and guidelines for the conservation of historic places in Canada. So these are federal Parks Canada guidelines, and they have been adopted by council for staff to use when evaluating alterations to heritage properties. I've included just a few here that speak specifically to this type of application. So the first is to recognize each historic place as a physical record of its time, place, and use. Do not create a false sense of historical development by adding elements from other historic places or properties, or by combining features of the same property that never coexisted. The idea here, I think, that is in line with what's being proposed is that the new additions are different. They're not trying to replicate or mimic something that was older. It will be easy to tell that these additions were proposed in 2021, and they're not trying to look like they've been there 100 years, which from a heritage planning perspective, we do want to make sure that any new additions are easily visible and readable as something, legible as something that is a current addition or change, and not something that has been there since the beginning of the rest of the house. Secondly, conserve the heritage value and character defining elements when creating any new additions to a historic place. Make the new work physically and visually compatible with, subordinate to, and distinguishable from the historic place. So again, the character defining elements of the heritage house, the 2-story portion, are all being retained. The new additions, in our perspective, is physically and visually compatible with. They are lower to the ground. They're using a proposed material that is a local material. In terms of subordinate to, again, they are much lower than the existing house, which is a 2-story form, and distinguishable from, I think everyone would agree that the stone, obviously, the design is distinguishable from, with the lower roof lines as well, and the flat roofs. Thirdly, create any new additions or related new construction so that the essential form and integrity of historic place will not be impaired if the new work is removed in the future. This is a really important one for staff as well. If in 40 years someone wanted to remove the proposed additions, they could, and the historic place of the historic house would still remain. Next. As part of the district plan, there is a block analysis for each of the properties and areas. There's not too much in the district plan speaking about this property in particular. The block analysis just includes the following, which is that the area forms the southern end of a deep gully, which runs the old Oakville district from north to south. The central feature of this area is the house at 212 Front Street. So that is the Warren doorstep to the east. And it also notes that the area should become an integral part of a walkway system that would run the length of the lakeshore. So that's not really part of this proposal, but those are the only elements it really spoke to in terms of analyzing the block. The one specific thing it did include on this property, which you can see in the map below, it just says retaining walls emphasize the slope. So again, the retaining walls and the terrace gardens are to remain as part of this application. Next. So again, architectural guidelines, these are from district plan. Scale and height, mass compatible with surrounding buildings to visual connectedness and existing sense of scale. Again, they are lower than the existing house. They're on the footprint of what's there now. Again, the only change is to the west with the new garage. And that is replacing a form that was to the rear of the house. So it's not an increase in footprint. Construction materials visually sympathetic with existing buildings and streetscape, yet appropriate given the design of the new structure. They are proposing to use a local material. Lot line setbacks be permitted to vary with consideration given to neighboring setbacks, not quite applicable to this one. Most of the existing setbacks have been retained. Distinguishing original qualities of a character or structure or environment shall not be destroyed. Again, the existing house is to be restored. Distinctive stylistic features or examples of skilled craftsmanship which characterize a building should be treated with sensitivity. Same thing with the last point. The next point is about deteriorated architectural features should be repaired rather than replaced. There's no proposal to repair or to replace anything in the existing house. Its proposal is to restore everything. Density to be in conformity with the official plan. It is. And finally, design style, materials, and color for new construction to be considered on an individual basis on the premise that contemporary styles can be more appropriate in certain cases than emulating turn-of-the-century designs. So again, yes, it is more of a contemporary design. And from staff's perspective, we do want to see something that is different and is not emulating the existing house. Next. Just some other couple of points from the district plan on landscaping. That new fences and walls should be of materials that are sympathetic to scale and character of the study area and using materials like brick, native stone, wood, and cast iron. So again, the existing fence is to remain or be rebuilt in the same materials, so wood. And so we do think it meets the character of the area and of the property. Next. So this is staff's recommendation that the application be approved subject to the following: that the stone cladding material be either salvaged lake stone or new stone that resembles lake stone as much as possible. That final details on all new windows, doors, and cladding be submitted to staff for final approval, and that the permit expire 2 years from final approval by council. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Carolyn. A lot. Okay, thank you for that presentation. And that little bit of clarification about the trees helps me because I know that with a heritage application, sometimes we're told we will plant new trees, but we can't enforce that. This is part of the site plan process, and therefore these trees must be planted. So that's good to hear. Other questions, Kathy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have lots of comments, but those will be at the time when we've had an opportunity to listen from delegations as well as the applicant. I guess several questions I have. First and foremost is the process that so that we have a fuller understanding. The Committee of Adjustment is separate than the heritage process in terms of permitting. So while the Committee of Adjustment deals with the planning aspects and the zoning aspects, we deal with just the heritage, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so if the Committee of Adjustment, although they have approved various aspects, if we at Heritage do not approve this application, then the application or the permitting would not go forward until such time as either the applicant appeals it or there's revisions made to the existing application, and we can maybe have it come back to Heritage or something to approve something. But I just want a clearer understanding that Committee of Adjustment's been dealt with. So it's just the heritage we're dealing with today.
Yeah, correct. And if anything was to change through the heritage permit process that altered the minor variances and increased any of them, they would have to go back to the Committee of Adjustment. If it uses the existing approved minor variances or less than that, it would continue. It would be fine. It would continue through. But if any changes from heritage required additional variances, they would have to start back at Committee of Adjustment.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that clarification, Carolyn. I guess one of the biggest problems I have with this application, first and foremost, is 2 garages, 2 driveways. And you mentioned the site being quite tight, okay, in terms of restrictions. Do we have other homes within this district that have 2 garages, 2 driveways?
Off the top of my head, I do not have an answer for that. I cannot think of any, and often because we don't, there are lots of double driveways along Trafalgar Road, and that's for access to Trafalgar, which because it's a very difficult street to back on onto. So there's lots of examples in heritage districts of 2 driveways, but not necessarily 2 garages. It has been, I think we have seen in the past, you know, a garage on one side and, you know, sort of sheds or something on the other side, but not necessarily used for vehicles. But I'd have to really do an assessment. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any. It is a unique spot being on the lake and being so close to the street. And of course, because they can't go farther back. Ideally,
conservation.
Ideally, we love to see tandem garages because from the street view, we're only seeing, you know, a single car garage door, but you can still, the owner can still fit 2 cars in. And in this case, it's just not possible because they can't go any farther back towards the lake.
Okay, you make reference to the lake stone, okay, being used. My recollection, or my understanding rather, is that the majority of the lake stone I've seen has been in properties farther to the east, but majority tend to be similar to that wall with the archway. In other words, they're in addition to a house. They're not the house itself, other than maybe at the bottom of a home. And again, not particularly in this district. I guess one of the concerns I have too, or questions I have, and it relates to process. There's been a lot of feedback or questions from members of the public as to when we comment at Heritage, how are those comments reflected going forward? For instance, I know that a Committee of Adjustment, Heritage has no bearing there, but when an applicant refers to support and they make no reference to any of the comments that we provided, is that because ours is a separate process and therefore it has no bearing at that process of adjustment?
So in terms of committee adjustment, so heritage comments are included in terms of from the staff level, and as well sometimes from the heritage committee if it's gone through site plan like this one did. So when it initially went to site plan or came in for site plan and we went to the heritage committee for comments, those comments from the committee were incorporated and used for the site plan process as well as the committee of adjustment process, since they were both going on at the same time. And so some of the changes that you saw in terms of additional landscaping, some changes to the design of the easterly wing were directly from the Heritage Committee. As all planning applications, there are a lot of things to balance. So there's planning objectives, there's environmental objectives, there's heritage, and so all of these comments are taken into consideration, and there has to be a balance to meet all of the different objectives. So at the end of the day, the process still has to come back through the heritage permit as it is today. And so if the committee isn't supportive of all the final details that you see before you, those are things that can be dealt with at the Heritage Committee, simply because sometimes specific materials or windows or little details like that wouldn't necessarily be a concern through the committee of adjustment or site plan process. So the idea is really to work collaboratively as much as possible and taking everyone's comments in. And so that was the case with the Heritage Committee. A lot of the comments that were made did make actual specific changes for the site plan process. But today is one not final, I shouldn't say, but one additional step for the Heritage Committee to have their comments.
Okay, thank you. The other question, and I know that the chair referenced it at the beginning, was the trees. I've seen a couple of comments from members of the public regarding heritage trees, and to my recollection, we only have two I was aware of: the magnolia, which has gone by the wayside, which was on 42 Lakeshore Road West, and the great white oak, which is up Bronte Road. So, and again, speaking to the fact job jar in the future, if we do have trees that we think are of significance, we have to be mindful of having them go through a designation process so as to have a clear understanding what is heritage and what is just an which is an older mature tree that lends itself to that particular property. So the only two are the ones I'm aware of, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. The districts can speak to, the district plans for the heritage districts do speak to just generally retaining trees where possible and keeping greenery and landscaping and open space. This district plan doesn't really have much on that. The 1st and 2nd Street district, which is a newer plan, does speak to it a little bit more. Generally speaking, the town wants to see trees retained as much as possible, but we also understand from a larger perspective is we have to still permit owners to be able to do alterations to their property and add additions. And sometimes the only place you can add an addition is where a tree is. And so therefore, if it's not a designated heritage tree, because you're correct, the Bronte oak tree and the magnolia tree are the only two that have actually been included in an individual bylaw. Then again, it's about finding that balance, and some ways to mitigate that is to require the planting of additional trees.
Okay. And I guess the question I have also relates to part 4 versus part 5. When I look at a property so prominent as this, are we losing an opportunity to preserve or conserve as many attributes of that home and that property in particular by not designating it a part 4? Like, I'm thinking the Warren doorstep isn't part 4. They're in a district, but to me, the district is more of an umbrella versus specific sites. Is there an opportunity in addition to revising our bylaws, okay, which is a big one, but is there something we should maybe be looking at by making some of these properties part 4 regardless of being in a district?
Yes, you can certainly designate properties both within a district and individually. The Ontario Heritage Act did not use to permit that, so when this district was created, and even the Trafalgar Road district was created, any existing part 4 heritage properties had to be excluded from the district. They weren't allowed to have 2 layers. Today we are permitted to have that, and so the downtown district is a good example. There were many part 4 properties that were already in place when the district for downtown was created. So a lot of those properties do have the 2 protections, and having the 2 levels of protection is very helpful because it can speak to individual pieces of the house, individual elements of the house, for example, but also speak to the larger character of the property and how it fits in with the district. So that it's absolutely a possibility. It's just not the case currently in this property.
Thank you. Those are my questions, Mr. Chair.
Super. Thank you, Councillor Dunnock. Are there any other questions of Carolyn at this point? Nope. Good.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I believe you got Councillor Giddings.
Okay. Did I point? Oh, there you go. I don't know what's wrong with the screen today. People are popping around all over the place. You're up there or down there. So I now see you in the top left-hand corner. Councillor Giddings, off you go.
We're just trying to mess with you, Mr. Chair. Further to Councillor Duddock's comments, she asked a number of the questions that I had. In terms of clarity, I appreciate the comment about heritage trees. There is a great deal of confusion with site plan versus our private tree bylaw. And so the site plan process and the ability to remove trees falls under provincial statute, correct, Carolyn?
I believe so.
And so our private tree bylaw is not able to be implemented in cases like this. I appreciate the Committee of Adjustment comments and the Part 4 versus Part 5. For clarity, this item must go to Planning and Development Council to be dealt with, I believe, by July 19th. We have a 90-day window. I think it was April 21st, so count the days. I think it said in the agenda, Council has to deal with this by July 19th.
Correct.
And a number of comments that came in concerning the additional structure, the larger structures interfering with the view of the lake for either residents or people walking along Front Street. We have no ability to deal with that, how you take it?
In terms of retaining views?
Right.
So, you know, there's always things that we look for in the Heritage District, especially in public sections in terms of the public park and keeping views open there. On private property, that is a little bit more difficult. There's also nothing in the district plan that speaks to any specific views through this property. You know, individual properties are, you know, property owners are permitted to be able to build something in their property, you know, in addition that meets zoning and meets the heritage permit and guidelines. So there's nothing specific to say that certain views have to be kept open on this private property, no.
All right, and the existing wings, I think you mentioned 40s, 50s era, or 30s, 40s, they aren't, as you said, they aren't able to be designated.
So the whole property is designated because it's in the district. And so what we do is we identify as what is considered to be historic and contributing to the property.
Sure.
Again, the rear additions, whether we do see that there were wings that were added by the 1940s using the old fire insurance maps, the current ones we have building permits records for, and of course they don't appear to be 1940s. They've got large new windows and are quite altered, and they're also not quite the same footprint as what we saw from the fire insurance plans from the 1940s. The 1940s garage wing is essentially the same footprint of what was there. Was altered a little bit in the 1960s when it was extended, but from staff's perspective, we didn't feel like any of those were of significant heritage value to make sure that they were retained.
All right, and I appreciated your the slides in terms of the guidelines for heritage preservation. It took me back to being in these committees and sitting around a table with Mayor Harry when he talked about what we were able to do and what we weren't able to do and how we had to honor the existing structure. So thanks for taking me back to some Harry preaching. Welcome, most welcome this morning. All right, Mr. Chair, those are the questions I have for now. I'm looking forward to hearing from the delegations.
Good. George?
There, I couldn't get unmuted. Sorry, you've just Councillor Giddings just raised a matter that struck my memory anyhow. Back when we dealt with this thing in December, the committee provided heritage-related comments, and this is to Carolyn. And interestingly enough, the major comments, I don't know, don't seem to me to have been addressed by the architects and the owner since that meeting, because clearly, and I'll read them directly from our minutes. Some use of stone would be complementary, but as shown, it's too much stone, and it's not complementary to the Heritage House or Heritage District. Stone-clad walls do not exist in the Heritage District, and the proposed stone walls put too much emphasis on the additions and take away from the Heritage House. The two garages flanking the building on each side create a focus on the garage and stone and overwhelming the Heritage House. So I'm trying to figure out that did the architects and the owners, whoever you were dealing with, Carolyn, in the interim, consider any of those comments at all, or were they simply push us off?
So some of the ideas were floated by was changing some of the materials on portions of the garages and adding another material. The fear was adding another material. You would have stucco, wood paneling, say cedar shingles and stone. It would be a bit too much. The opening for the covered entryway was widened, which eliminated quite a bit of the stone along that wall. And I think the owners are just their whole goal was really to have that sort of stone garden wall as they're proposing, is the way they're describing it. So they've kept forward with the stone. But again, these are details that, while they weren't necessarily worked through the committee adjustment and site plan process, this is certainly the place for those details to be addressed at the Heritage Committee today.
Yeah, well, thank you, because it seems to me that, funnily enough, my memory is good in some days, not so good in others, but today I recollect in reading these comments back to you that the predominant or majority of the comments, I think, from our December meeting, were to the effect that the two stone additions to each side bookended the house. That's not in these minutes, but I remember people saying, yes, you're right, they bookend the house, and the house is just an auxiliary to these stone additions. So that was my question, Carolyn, about how did the architects and or owners decide to deal with these comments, if at all? Thank you.
And through you, Mr. Chair, to George, that's something possibly the architect could speak to as well on the call.
Yes, George. I mean, I looked through the comments too, but remember, these are comments given by everybody. And sometimes when you look at them on the occasions when we're asked to provide input, the comments are mutually contradictory, because it's picking up what we've all said. So I might have said something, it gets picked up. He might have said something, it gets picked up. So it's just a collection of thoughts, but it's thoughts that should be taken into account. So I hear what you're saying, and I'm sure we'll come back to that when we begin more active discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks, George. But at the moment, we've got questions, and that was a fair one. Are there any other questions directly for Carolyn? Okay. So normally at this time, we would have the applicant. And now, Madam Secretary, I don't see on my screen any sign that we actually have made contact with, was it Terry that would be coming? I don't know who had indicated.
Mr. Chairman, Terry Martino is available.
Okay, can we bring him in, please? Terry, can you hear me?
I can, Mr. Chair. Good morning.
We can't see you, and that's okay if you want to remain cloaked, then you may do
no.
so. But,
thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm trying to start my video now, but it doesn't seem to be.
Your sound is waving about and coming and going a bit.
Good morning.
Good morning, Terry. So you've probably heard what Carolyn had to say, so we want now to hear what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Firstly, I would like to thank Carolyn for her extremely thorough my point of view, I'd be happy to answer any questions that the members may have. I would just like to, listening to some of the members' comments, address what I think is the biggest issue. So when we met last for comments in December of 2020, we took note of the comments made. I think we had an open and frank discussion. And I can assure the committee that we took all of the comments from the committee extremely seriously and worked with staff through the site plan process as well as heritage staff in addressing those comments. I'd just like to start with, as everybody knows, the site is extremely constrained, mostly due to its proximity to the lake. So in discussions with conservation, we could not increase the floor area that was there, half of the floor space. And the only opportunity for an addition was indicated or at least identified by conservation that they would accept the western side of the property. We took the opportunity to construct an extremely small addition, the one-story garage that you see to the west, and it's significantly set back that conservation would allow from Front Street. This does a number of things. One, it allows for parking of car within the garage, as well as one out front of the garage, fully on private property. And so we have safety issues. It's a well-traveled street, Front Street, and it was thought by all parties that we're working with is that was important. Therefore, we could reduce what is presently the 2.5-story garage structures to the east of the 2-story stucco house, and reduce that down to just a single car. And the idea is that a car would go in and park there, and no more, or at least there would be another car parked out in front of it on the road lines. So then what we could do is we use the other part of the garage, because again, we're constrained by conservation authority to create a covered, and that's effectively the mudroom entrance, secondary entrance. And your comments with respect to the amount of stone, we used it as an opportunity to differentiate that second entrance, mudroom entrance, to the house by reducing the amount of stone. The opening is very large. It is unlike the openings for the garage themselves, which have a door set back about 6 inches from the face of the stone. This is an open entrance. It is lit from a light well feature, as Carolyn alluded to, and so it would appear as a bright opening, not unlike the image that Carolyn had shown of the opening in the stone wall garden. So that is the idea. Furthermore, there was a tree planted there. The amount of paving was reduced, and so it is just a pedestrian walkway leading to that. So we believe that we, in that way, that was one of the biggest ways in which we addressed the reduction in the amount of stone and the prominence, or at least the perception, that there were a number of garages. So now, the garage to the west that we are adding is well set back. It's set back from the face of the house 3.8 meters, 12.5 feet. It's set back 5.24 meters from the lot line, and there's differentiation in the entrance. Furthermore, the roofs are green. They'll be planted with ivy, and the expectation is the ivy will break down the walls and cover them with a more approximate I guess there's been some comments with respect to stone used at the property or in the area. I guess I would like to point out for everyone that the idea design is the extension of the stone wall. Stone walls are used for adding foundation walls in the neighborhood. The specific garden walls, entrance pillars, the earth leading right up to the secondary house.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
Trish McTavish
Yes.
needs to.
Yes, I think it's been muted. It kept coming off and on, but I think the clerk is on it.
The use of stone at the Aircliffs estate, and I guess quite iconically and most appropriately, the granary itself is a full 3-story stone building, which is in the area. So those are my comments with respect to how we tried. Oh, I guess one other thing. There was concern and there were comments with respect, and I think this is where some of the overbearing amount of stone was the perception from the park. Perhaps could staff put that slide back up with respect to the view, the rendering of the park view? I guess, you know, after we met in December 2020, we took that extremely seriously, and that is a 20-foot setback to the new addition, the stone wall. As you can see in that rendering, it's significantly landscaped such that virtually none of the stone is actually seen from the park. And so we took the opportunity and Heritage Advisory's comments from that meeting into consideration and significantly landscape that area to reduce the impact of that addition, so that you can only kind of see the windows, at least the flat roof of that's the master bedroom addition, up above any of the landscape. I guess as staff have pointed out, and again, thank you to Carolyn, that we've tried to work within the Canadian standards and guidelines, and Caroline had that great slide up there. We believe that we meet those standards. I guess from our point of view is that the most dominant feature of this home from Front Street, and you can see in the renderings, is the 2-story stucco white heritage house. The quote-unquote bookends on either end, as I said, the west garage is well set back. They are 1-story structures, not 2. They have a flat roof, again, subordinate to the dominant heritage structure. As Carolyn pointed out, from a heritage conservation point of view, if they were removed, the heritage 2-story stucco house would be there, untouched. By having a flat roof on the east side and changing the existing garage additions that were put on in the 40s and 60s, we've managed to reclaim some of the historical fabric. Those 2 second-story windows, which staff alluded to, are in fact there. They were covered up. And so we restored historical fabric. And I guess it's our contention that the dominant feature is the 2-story stucco house by its size, by its mass, and that the additions are truly subordinate and differentiated while being compatible with the use of the lake stone, which is found in the area. Those are my comments. I know time is of this, so I'll be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Terry. Yeah, when I look at that east elevation and I look at the existing condition, if that had been subject to heritage, if they'd come to us with sort of what looks like a 1.5-story garage plus another garage, like a 1.5 size too, as well as the removal perhaps of 2 heritage windows in order to accommodate it, that application wouldn't have got as far as the committee. It would have died long before that. So that's certainly an improvement. Okay, questions for the architect? Looking around, there are no questions at this stage? That's fair enough. Okay, fine. Oh, Jerry, did you want to ask a question? Go ahead.
No. Thank you. For you, Mr. Chair. I'm hearing an echo.
It's the McTavishes again.
Thank you, Terry, for the explanation. I wanted to ask a question.
I'm trying to ask a question.
Can the McTavishes permanently mute their phone, please?
Yeah. Sorry about that. Again, I just wanted to ask, in view of all the comments we've received on this application today, and given the sentiment, I guess some negative pushback that we're reading, Terry, I wondered if It would be a deal breaker, my favorite term, if the material, if the material of the additions, if you kept the stone, the lake stone at the base level, as the photograph that Carolyn showed us underneath the picket fence, where the actual stone base is mitigating the slope of the land, and anything above that stone base would be the same material or similar to the later additions of the house. So retaining the stucco of the original, but carrying the anything above the baseline in the wood siding, maybe breaking up a little bit of the mass on the east side, if that, but keeping in general the plan as is. So giving your clients everything that they require from a space perspective, but just manipulating a little bit the material aesthetics on the exterior, so that from the comments we're hearing, it could bring back some of the Oakville vernacular feel, the pastoral feel of the area, because I think people are responding negatively to what they perceive to be a little bit of material brutality of how those additions are rendered, and maybe bringing that baseline and creating your stone wall as you have it on the west side at the southern tip, you know. So I'm asking the question, is it a deal breaker for you as an architect to review your material aesthetics above the baseline for the stone?
Okay.
Thank you, Jerry, through you, Mr. Chair. I guess in terms of deal breaker, we've worked extremely hard with staff. I guess it's our contention that we believe if we were to introduce a third material, that we're sort of bringing more influence to our design rather than sort of leaving it as a singular garden wall of the stone material. That is to say, that would be downplayed. I guess one of the other things we believe in why it's subordinate is that a stone wall by its very nature is not articulated. It's just a stone wall. So it doesn't have all of the details that the rest of the house would have. That is to say, the stucco, the trim, the shutters, the painted, etc. If we were to introduce a third material, undoubtedly there would be additional detailing to it that would make it more ornate. So we believe that a kind of single material that ties into the base as well as the wall cladding is actually kind of more subtle. We are not opposed to, and we discussed this with staff, that we could step the covered entrance that I spoke about to the mudroom back slightly, thus differentiating it from the garage. Like, so move it in plane. That is to say, the garage would stick out further, and we could move that back. We've also discussed other stone-like materials. I guess I could advise the committee that we've been fortunate enough to secure the actual lake stone for the addition. So we were kind of looking forward to making our authentic wall. I'm sorry, does that answer your question, Jerry?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't, Terry, thank you for that. I think that the perception from the comments that we're getting is that even though the attempt has been made to carry the second material, my comment was not to introduce a third material, but to retain an existing material that is there, and that is the wood siding that is on the easterly additions. It's not introducing a new material. But I think the pushback is that the stone wall, which is basically on the baseline, has been extended too far up, and it creates a cubic aesthetic that people are responding negatively to. So perhaps, you know, we don't know unless we see it. The question was, would you be amenable to attempting that change, which may appease many of the comments that we're receiving here? We're trying to kind of find a middle ground that would make everybody happy, a win-win situation. That was the question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jay. Anyone else got a question for Terry at this point? Okay, no, good, fine. Now we have a number of delegations. And I guess, Madam Secretary, you gave me a list, and the list started off with Jane Hockrig. So I assume that was your intention to call the delegates in the order on that list. So could you admit Jane Hockrig?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I brought her into the meeting.
Jane?
Yes, Chairman Bucknell, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can't see you, but that's okay. You don't have to. You don't have to be visible, but we can hear you. So,
I didn't have a shower this morning.
yeah,
okay.
I'll just remind you that you have a 10-minute time slot, and that the secretary will manage that. And then after that, there may be questions. Okay, Jane, your 10 minutes are starting from now.
Thank you, Chairman Bucknell and members of the Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee. I do want to say right now that there's jackhammering going on in my basement. Jane just asked them to stop for this 10-minute slot, so hopefully that noise will happen, will shut soon. My name is Jane Hockrig. My husband and I, Jamie McRae, live in the Oakville Heritage District at 65 Navy Street. It's my understanding that each of you received a copy of our submission regarding the heritage permit application last night. And it sounds, George, like there was a lot of reading, but as such, it was not my intention to actually read through my submission to you. My hope is that each of you have had a chance to look at it. Our position is that the proposed changes and additions are not complimentary as an alteration to the heritage home circa 1837 and not sympathetic to the existing state character as envisioned by the old Oakville Heritage District plan, for which the home and the property, I think everyone acknowledges, is an integral part. As you can see from our submission, our position is based on two primary points. The first point is that the role and character of the Heritage District, the Oakville Heritage District, is critical and should always be an important consideration for any heritage permit application, given that it pertains, that the old Oakville District Plan pertains to the town's beginning. Given the prominence of the property at 174, 176, this, in our view, is particularly significant. As Carolyn noted, this house was built in 1837, and it's described as a large two-story house that displays the characteristic plan and profile of Georgian houses. Its position on Front Street. Carolyn noted that it was part of Block 3, but I'm hearing some noise again. Oh, are we okay?
I think, Harry, you need to mute. Right, go ahead, Jane.
Okay, I wanted to note that this property is actually the juncture of 3 blocks in the district plan, blocks 2, 3, and 10. So it's a very prominent historic home, not only within the 1 block, but actually 3 blocks. It sits diagonally across from Thomas Street, which is recognized in the plan for the cohesiveness of its historic buildings and the historic and archaeological interest of the footpath into Lakeside Park. It sits on Front Street, which is very narrow and an integral part of a pedestrian walkway system that connects Lakeside to Dingle. And given its prominence, we would argue that any proposed changes must consider not only the impact on the heritage house itself, but also the extent to which it's sympathetic to the historic and what one member of the Heritage Oakville Committee described as almost a pastoral streetscape. Our second point is that we don't feel that the application adequately addresses 3 of the key guidelines that you consider when you're thinking about alterations to historic buildings and new construction. The first one is about scale and mass. One of the challenges that we see is this house is very close to the street. And so in our mind, the proposed new construction on both sides creates this feeling of actually enveloping the heritage house. And so we are concerned about the box-like form that creates in terms of, I think Jerry referred to it as a cubic aesthetic. And while we appreciate the proposed landscaping, in our mind, I think the cubic aesthetic is one that is almost as presently formed. And where it's linked to is the second guideline around construction materials. I will note that the only stone structure within the old Oakville Heritage District is the granary. The granary is a combination of lake stone from Oakville and limestone from Kingston. There are several small lake stone garden walls and a few remaining lake stone foundations within the district, but that's it. And so contextually, actually using that as the basis for all of the predominant cladding that is visible to the street in our mind is not appropriate. I will note just quickly that there's a reference to aluminum clad windows on the new additions, and we were not aware that this material is encouraged, and I guess question the rationale for that. Finally, in terms of the third guideline, we appreciate the fact that contemporary styles are acknowledged and part of the way the evolution is happening in terms of heritage alterations. We have actually gone back and read all of the applications that were approved for alteration by this recommended by this committee between 2018 and 2021. In our view, the elements of contemporary style have allowed the differentiation between new and old. Our concern, though, is that this application goes beyond what is envisioned in terms of that contemporary. And as noted in the Heritage Oakville comments in December, the design is interesting architecturally and is a bold architectural move, but not sure it's the right fit for the Heritage Conservation District. We agree with that. We think it is bold. I think in another place, I'd love to live there, quite frankly. But I don't think it fits with the guidelines for alteration within the district plan. So we would ask that the committee turn this down and send back for an alternative. I do want to respond to a couple of comments that were made earlier that I would tend to agree with. I do think that it is somewhat coming down to what Ms. Tino referred to as a material aesthetic. And I'm particularly concerned that there is so much emphasis put on this lake stone, which in our mind is not the appropriate material. And I think sort of retaining some blend of the existing material in addition to the stucco is likely the appropriate way to go and would potentially be an appropriate alternative design. The one final thing I'll say to you is that when you take a measuring tape and you actually measured the width of the two new additions on the east and the west, they are actually wider in combination than the actual heritage house. And so again, some concerns about that impact that has. Those are our comments. I did have, Mr. Chairman, a question that we had sent in advance that I would like clarity on. That was that in December 2020, the committee looked at this application from the standpoint of 170 and 176 Front Street. So I guess, and today we're looking at it in terms of 176 Front Street. I'd like to clarify what's happened to 174 Front Street. Is that a separate lot that could be developed in the future? I don't expect so based on heritage, the Halton Conservation, but I think it's an important point that I just want to confirm. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Jane. Yes, I saw that question, and I'm sure Carolyn can answer it. It's probably a difference between postal address and the way the plan, the blocks are arranged.
Yes, Mr. Chair, it's actually an older, for some reason, it's an older addressing that they had on that property. I'm not sure when it went in, 174, 176. I know there were always talks about there being an apartment in part of the house in earlier days. And so essentially we found it really is one lot. And so it's just to clear things up, we asked the owners, I think the engineering and construction department asked them to choose a number. And so the idea was to choose 176. So that was just to clarify things, and that's what's been done.
Yeah, I thought as much.
And there is, sorry, just to clarify, there is no separate lot that will be changed. The lot itself is the same. And
despite the size of the lot, the chance of getting any easement to divide it into two are 0 to none. The second thing, Jane, is you mentioned the windows, and I've said this to staff before, not to call them metal windows. When we adopted that standard, these are actually wood windows, and what they have is a metal coating. but they are wood windows, and they were accepted by this committee as an appropriate material for use, and therefore approved by council, and therefore now part of our guidelines. And there are many, many examples of it in the district, in this district and in the other district where this particular material has been used. So it's not uncommon. It's a modern treatment.
If I may, Mr. Chair, we only support them on new additions, not on the existing house. So the existing house windows are to be restored. If there is deterioration of an older wood window, we have guidelines for how those are to be replaced, and they do need to be replaced with wood windows if at least 30% of the window is deteriorated. So again, aluminum clad wood windows are only supported for new additions.
Yes, that's right. Okay, good. Now, any questions of Jane, who kept well within her time? Thank you, Jane. Any questions of Jane at this stage? No? Well, okay, thank you, Jane. And stay tuned because this has some ways to go before it's finished. Okay, the next delegate that I have is Chris Stoat. Chris, nice to at least see your name on the screen again. It's a while since we've served on the committee together. If you would unmute yourself. And we can now see you. Okay, Chris, the floor is yours. You've got your 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. And I appreciate the Heritage Committee taking time to read, I hope, my relatively brief submission. I just want to state that my primary concerns were that the Heritage Committee's comments and recommendations for consideration were taken into account. And I think there's been considerable discussion about that already, and that I think it's up to you now to judge whether you feel they've been appropriately taken into account. My concern was with process because many of us at OLRA were somewhat blindsided to learn that our board had written a letter, and we were somewhat concerned that that letter was coloring what was happening here. I've expressed that in my submission, as have others, and so I would like to yield my time to others at this point.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Are there any questions of Chris? Councillor Gittings.
Appreciate your letter and you appearing this morning, Chris. You mentioned in your note landscaping to soften the impact. Did you see what the proponent had suggested, or was it just your overall concern of the need for it?
So the render. I've had a better look at the renderings as they've been shown this morning. I think it's up to the Heritage Committee to determine whether that offsets some of the other concerns that have been raised by others. The biggest, you have two issues. One is I don't think that any of us here are in the business of legislating or ruling on taste issues. It's about authenticity and compatibility. And I'm not on your committee. I don't, want to weigh in on that. My concern was a process concern. Primarily was really the issue of consistency, which is a big concern with heritage because it's so complex, and the varying schools of thought that seem to ebb and flow. We seem to have now settled on the idea that editions should be distinct in appearance and of their era, which was not the case. Some years ago when I was on the committee, there was definite uncertainty about that sort of thing. My issue here is making sure that we have integrity of process, that the Heritage Committee's comments are properly taken into account. And the fear is that if that is not occurring, then you set up a situation where everyone can appeal their applications on the basis of prior inconsistencies, and it loses any authority. And that's what I would hope that you would bear in mind.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, appreciate your thoughts. Any
other questions of Chris? Nope. Okay, Chris. as they say in the stage, exit stage left, but stay around. Okay, the third delegate that I am aware of is Catherine Hurley. Now, we know that she can handle the technology well because she's delegated to the committee virtually before. Catherine, you are still on mute. If you would unmute yourself.
Yes.
We can hear you, we can't see you, but that's, oh, there we are, we can see you. Wonderful.
I mean, since December, progress is being made.
You look nice and summery too. Thank you very much for that. So your 10 minutes are starting for now. Thank you.
Okay, I'm on the clock. Thank you very much, Chair Bucknell, and to the advisory committee members. And also the staff, planning, and heritage, and our dear Ward 3 councillors, David Gidding and Janet Haslett Thiel, and Kathy Dedek, Ward 2. You've been a great support and resource for the Lakeside residents in this matter. I sent in a submission. I'm certainly not going to be reading through that. There's been a really good discussion here, and obviously a lot of talent and interest around the table. Being a heritage property owner on 24 Thomas Street, I live in one of the 1852 Duncan Chisholm shipbuilders cottages, and I'm within direct line of sight to the 1837 James McDougall heritage property. I think what you're hearing is that the heritage property owners almost assume a trusteeship, in that, you know, we lovingly take care of these properties for the short time that we have the privilege of living in them, and we share a responsibility for passing them along to the next owners or generation of Oakvillians to preserve and protect. And so by extension, we have that same connection of trusteeship with the heritage conservation districts. And being in the first heritage district with a property on Front Street, and historically Front Street is a landmark location because from the original land surveying, everything started from the front and moved out. So this property holds incredible significance. I think by virtue of the written letters and the requested delegations, what I've learned in this planning process, being sort of thrown in the deep end from the site plan application phase when I appeared in December, and that was at the time to make an argument for the natural heritage of the site, to then return to the Committee of Adjustment in terms of the planning considerations such as traffic safety and setbacks and conservation halting, permits and requirements, to now on to this request for heritage permit, and framing an argument that would be has to be through a heritage lens. So I think it points to some of the questions that Councillor Dudek was first asking at the opening of this meeting, of these parallel universes. But heritage planning is planning. And so just being an observer in this process, there's been it's felt like a lot of left hand, right hand. And I guess I'm hoping what will come from this is a better integration of how heritage isn't sort of siloed, or at least it feels like that, or that we're having to come in at the 11th hour again to try to protect and be sympathetic to a district. So this property is iconic. I think with the planning process, these applications are so singular. So we have to focus on 176 Front Street. But what we're missing is the cumulative effect of how this impacts the district, how it impacts Oakville heritage across all 4 heritage districts and future districts that will hopefully be added. So I think that what's interesting here is just try to go to the Ontario Heritage Act. We've been presented with Parks Canada guidelines, but this committee is really under a mandate of following Ontario Heritage Act legislation, Part 5, and also the old Oakville Heritage Conservation District Plan recommendations or guidelines. So when I was looking at the evaluation heritage criteria that the province used, there are 9. But there are 2 in particular of the 9 that I think are relevant to today's discussion. And the first one is where a building is an integral part or distinctive of a community, or is considered to be a landmark, its contribution to the neighborhood character may be of special value. In other words, all development applications must be sympathetic to its neighborhood. I'm proposing that 176 Front Street should be considered for landmark status, along with other Front Street properties like the Warren Doorstep and so on, because of that original shoreline front of township history and how the period where the town was laid out, and from that point, we're telling a heritage story. The second part of this from the Ontario Heritage Guidelines is a building, together with its site, should retain a large part of its integrity, its relations to its earlier state, and the maintenance of its original or early materials and craftsmanship. Hazel Matthew Chisholm, William Chisholm's daughter, in her book, The Oakville in the 16, she describes that they were not clad in lake stone, but they used more humble and lighter materials. Section 5 of the Act proposes the use of materials that are historically in keeping and sympathetic with the design and history of heritage district streetscapes and architecture. So while this design, uses a reference to, I think it's overwhelming, the use of the lake stone. I included some photos to this presentation. As you can see, a future career as a budding photographer is not in the future for me, but because I just took a walk on Saturday morning, a stroll in the vicinity of 176, and you can see that the lakeside heritage homes, they were never clad in stone, which is now being proposed. Commercial properties, yes, such as the granary, but not homes. And I think that is what some of the historians were saying. The stone walls served an understated purpose. They were used as directional and property demarcations, such as the gentle sloping wall along the Chisholm family estate, so Ercles. Now the location of the museum and the existing stone wall along the east side of Front Street. To bring in images of Gairloch. Gairloch is not part of the Lakeside district, first district. So I think from the photos that I have sent, and from, I know, your own strolls in the area, to have what's being proposed right now, while it's a very exciting design architecturally and a bold architectural move, to get back to the December 15th minutes, but not sure if it's the right fit for the Heritage Conservation District. So I'm just building on the points, the suggestions that have been made for possibly a redesign. During the site plan application phase, when you're dealing with site plans and then you're actually then presented by the architects with an image, a committee of adjustment, you know, a picture tells a story, 1,000 words. And so I think it would be really interesting for the committee and for the residents and the public to see what some of Jerry's suggestions have been, Jerry Tino's suggestions about trying to go back to something that gives a nod not only to the stone and the heritage, but you know, that it blends and is sympathetic to the streetscape, the existing streetscape.
Mr. Chairman, that's the time.
Yep, thank you, Madam Secretary. Catherine, you know your 10 minutes were up, but we've got your written submission too, and we've heard your comments, and I'm sure, are there any questions that anybody would like to ask of Catherine right now? Nope, not seeing any, but thank you for that input. It's appreciated, and we hear.
Yeah,
Jump. I think Brenda wants to, or is it Dave, has suddenly decided he wants to speak. He didn't do that when I looked over earlier. Anyway, Dave, off you go.
I'll wave my hand more furiously next time, Mr. Chair. Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Catherine, for your note, your details that were shared. And my question actually, Mr. Chair, is for staff, if they could answer one of the questions that Ms. Hurley had in terms of whether or not the Ontario heritage standards are being followed by the town of Oakville.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. So the first and foremost is the district plan guidelines, which were passed under the legislation of the Ontario Heritage Act. So those are specific, but there are additional regulations, Ontario regulations, that we do look at as well. And a lot of them are quite similar to the standards and guidelines done by the Parks Canada. They have not been officially adopted by council as the standards and guidelines have. So that's why I was particularly noting the standards and guidelines. And the reason for that being is that the Ontario Heritage Act legislates through that legislation. We have the district plan guidelines, which are much more specific. But generally speaking, a lot of the guidelines that Catherine was referring to are consistent with the standards and guidelines and other guidelines in the district plans as well. So they're absolutely something we can note on. We just haven't had them officially adopted by council as something that we use.
Thank you. I'd appreciate that. And in terms of a landmark property, could you elaborate on that a little bit, whether we are able to do that?
So again, this is speaking to Councillor Duddick's point earlier, which is that we could designate the property under Part 4 of the Heritage Act, or the town could propose to. Obviously, you know, the owners have their own rights of appeal, etc. But it's technically and legally possible for a property to be designated individually and as part of a district. So I'm guessing that's what you mean by landmark. We don't have any sort of status technically that's called landmark. It's really just about individual heritage designation status and district designation status.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is that it, everybody? Okay, good. Fine. Thank you again, Ms. Hurley, for your presentation. And I don't have any other delegations that had been notified of previously. Madam Secretary, has
Mr.
anyone else
Chairman,
indicated to you that they wish to speak?
Yes, Trish McTavish has called in.
Okay. So if Trish McTavish would now unmute her phone and join us. Trish, are you there? Good. Okay, Trish, you're on. The sound quality is very poor. Can you speak up?
I apologize.
sorry, Trish, we just can't hear you.
I'm trying. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you. I apologize for this. I'm on a different device than the what we're watching it on, and I thought I misunderstood the instructions. I apologize. I thought I was supposed to push *6, and anyway, I apologize for interrupting the meeting. It's just for everyone knows it wasn't Ross, it was me. I have two questions for Carolyn, and that's all. First of all, I know that a number of written submissions were sent in, and I just want to clarify that the members of Heritage have received those submissions, but did they get a chance to look at them prior to the meeting today?
Yes, we did.
You did, okay. And have they been cataloged? Can you tell us how many written submissions were sent in?
I would have to go back and count them. Perhaps the clerk could tell me.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah,
Mr. Chairman,
yeah.
there were 23.
Pardon me?
Mr. Chairman.
20?
Yes, yes, sorry. Madam Clerk?
23 written submissions were received.
Thank you. Okay, Trish, now there were 23 written submissions. Now I'm happy to have you ask these questions, and that clarifies the process, but the opportunity that you have now is to speak to the issue rather than to question the committee. But so if you do want to add anything to your submission, then we'll be happy to hear from you.
I was told, we were sent something that said that members of the public may also ask to speak during the meeting. And
yes.
All I said is that may I ask a question then?
Okay.
Of something?
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. That clarifies it for me too. So these were your two questions, were they, Trish?
The question that was the first question. The other question I wanted to ask of Carolyn is that you said that there were examples of homes in the district with stone cladding, but the images you showed were of a wall, the chimney of a siding house, and the granary, which is a commercial building. Were you able to find any other stone cladding homes with that material in our area?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't know that I said homes, or I may have misspoke, but there are buildings within Oakville that are clad in the material. So you're right, the granary, these stone boats, or what used to be called the stone boats building in Brawny. There were, I know, other historical buildings that did exist that no longer exist anymore. There are historical records of them, but you're correct in that most of my images were of chimneys and walls, walls meaning garden walls. So that may have been a bit of the confusion as well.
Thank you. But that's all, Mr. Chairman. Once again, I apologize for
No. We're so glad you joined. Thank you very much for your questions. They helped to clarify a few things for everybody, I think. Okay, are there any other people with questions or comments that they want to make, Madam Secretary?
Mr. Chairman, there are no other registered delegations or call-in.
Okay, so I guess we're confined to the board now. We've heard a lot. So Kathy, you want to kick off, and I will try to I'll write down Kathy, and then anybody else that will want to speak, just let me know, and I'll put the name down and call them appropriately. Thanks, Kathy. Off you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for not only the people who took the time to attend, participate, and discuss. I'm sorry, did the applicant want to? I saw Terry's hand going. Do you want to have an opportunity?
Terry, did you want to say something before we
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councillor Dudek. I just thought perhaps I would have an opportunity to maybe address one of the comments or two of the delegation.
That would probably be helpful before we go on. So please do that, Terry.
Okay, thank you. With respect to the first delegation, I guess, in listening to the comments with respect to the 3 guidelines, typically the first one that was mentioned, the scale and mass, and there was a comment that the additions on the east side and the west side are sort of bringing it closer to the street. I'd just like to highlight, as I said in my presentation, that small addition to the west of the garage, well set back, and that is to say it's 3.8 meters back, and that the eastern additions, these are rebuilt. These are on the exact same footprint, and they have to be because of the conservation authority. The exact same footprint of the additions that are there now. We're effectively recladding and reshaping the roof and using the interior space, but that east section is there. So we're not adding to that in any way, shape, or form. We recognize fully that Front Street is very narrow, and again, and a lot of pedestrian traffic. And that's one of the reasons that the creation of the western garage, as pointed out in the committee, actually helps the situation in that the garage is set back and allows
Your microphone is giving us a lot of rubbing, Terry. I don't know where it is. I don't think it's anybody else's. Everybody else is muted, but we can hear a lot of microphone noise, rubbing.
Is that better now?
Yep.
Okay. And, I guess, from our point of view, with respect to, I guess, the third delegation was mentioned, maintain the integrity of Section 5 under the Ontario Heritage Act. I'm very familiar with that. And I guess it's our contention that we have maintained the integrity. And the integrity is the 2-story white stucco house. And we've done everything in our power to maintain that and keep the additions compatible yet different, and such that they could be removed and nothing would be obscured from the exact heritage 2-story home. Lastly, I would just say that the test seems to be for the compatibility of the stone cladding material, although we've calmed it down, is whether it's found in the district. It's not mentioned in the plan, but it obviously exists. Whether it exists in a form of stone wall, the column at the Aircliffs Estate, the wall that's on King Street, which faces the Lawn Bowling Club, the granary, whether it's a commercial building or not. I think it's fair to say, in another historical Part 4 designated Gairloch Gardens, which after our December 20th meeting, Gairloch was going to be designated as a cultural landscape, that this stone, and particularly the lake stone, is a historical, and it is found in Oakville, and it is found, perhaps not prevalent, as some people would like, in the Heritage District, but it is there. And therefore, I would submit that it is a sympathetic material. It is used in the district. And I don't believe the test is then find me a house that has it, and it would be allowed. Those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Right, we really are now confined to the board. So you can mute yourself now, Terry, because we're not going to listen anymore. Kathy, the floor is yours.
You mean that most respectfully, don't you, Mr. Chair?
I think he knows us well enough.
Yes. Anyway, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to provide some comments, and I look forward to hearing comments from the other members of the committee as well. While several comments have been made referencing that they're sympathetic to the applicant's plight and what they're dealing with, while I agree to a certain degree, I think we also have to be very mindful of the fact that's not the primary focus when reviewing an application. The person or persons who purchased the property do it with full knowledge of what the limitations of the property are in terms of not only planning, zoning, but also for the heritage guidelines of the district. I disagree with the use of 2 garages. It is a very tight squeeze already in the pedestrian realm, and you're causing further problems with that. I don't think it's sympathetic or characteristic of this block or district. I feel it overwhelms the house and is not sympathetic or compatible to the characteristics of this district. And I say district because with all due respect, Terry referenced things like Gairloch and that. We're not dealing with Gairloch, we're dealing with this district. And so we have to apply that lens when looking at this application. I feel it overwhelms the home with that use. It looks very, I don't know why, it just looks institutional with that amount of the stone being there. And unlike other properties where there's a limited visibility in the public realm, hence the comments that Carolyn made reference to for the rear of the property, that usually we don't tend to be as, what shall I say, restrictive in terms of the rear. This one is highly visible. It's visible not only from the front of the property, but on the western side of the property. So we have to be very mindful of that. So I will not be supporting, unfortunately, the staff's recommendation. I look forward to hearing other comments. I would just reference something, and I guess I have to deal with the elephant in the room here. And this may not be so much for the committee, but going forward, when this was first presented to the Heritage Committee, there was reference of a letter of support from the Local Residents Association. That letter was never provided to this committee. It was oral in presentation. That issue has sort of trickled down throughout this process, whether it's the Committee of Adjustment or us coming back to this committee, having further discussions. And I know that when we talked with staff previously, there was a question of how the merits of a residents association letter of support factors into this. Well, it doesn't as much on this as it does on the Committee of Adjustment, but we're not dealing with the Committee of Adjustment. So I guess my concern is that maybe going forward, if staff could encourage delegates, applicants, that if they are going to be referencing something, that if there's an expectation they provide that documentation to the committee, so that we have an opportunity to review and discuss. Because I know for myself, and I know Councillor Giddings and Councillor Haslett-Thiel, the first question we ask when we see something coming from a residents association is this truly reflective of the entire community? Were they canvassed? Were they consulted? Or is this the executive that has put forward this recommendation? So I'll leave you with that. And as I say, look forward to the other comments.
Yes, thank you, Kathy. That's an interesting point because, as you say, Committee of Adjustment looks for these things as part of their package. It's not so much our process. But we do hear about it, and we heard about it, and we heard that there's some internal difficulty with that association and how that could have happened. But we heard from the residents themselves very directly. So we've had good, solid community input, I think, in this process so far. So who else wants to say something? Okay, Daniela, and then Bob.
Thank you, Drew, and thank you to all the residents and everybody who's made submissions. So I think it's pretty obvious that the community is not ready for this move. And I just wanted to state, I think what really is happening here is there's no room on this particular property for an architectural statement. I personally think it's really lovely, but my personal views or tastes are not relevant here. I think we have to be really careful in this process, and that includes Heritage Committee and staff, on making decisions about where we are going in terms of statements. And I think we've been shifting towards a little bit more contemporary, modern styles, which I'm comfortable with. I just think we need to be really crystal clear about defining. And this particular area in terms of a heritage district is so important. So we need to understand, where are we? Where are we going? What are we allowing? What are we not? Because the stone isn't the issue. It is, but the stone is one item. Tomorrow it could be another reference point. We could refer to another material in another spot that is relevant, but not in the plan. So I think what we're hearing is this cannot go through at this point. The other thing I think is really important is that, I say this, we can't just be in the job of getting to yes. And I find sometimes right now with heritage, we seem to be biased to getting to yes for the applicants, as opposed to the discomfort of the prolonging of these conversations to make sure that we have continuity, we have a plan, we have consistency in how we deal with each application. So while I personally might have voted okay for this, Daniela's view doesn't matter, right? And I think this is what gets really complicated at this kind of community level. The community is not comfortable with this direction. So that's what my comment is. I think that I don't have a problem with the 2 garages. I think there is an issue. You can't park on the street. I just don't think you can do so much stone. But again, I'm not the architect. I think there just has to be more listening. I also have to say I cannot stay on. So I want to clarify that I cannot support this application at this point. So I don't know, can I leave that with you guys, that my vote is no for now, because I can't stay on any longer. I have a meeting at 11:30. I'm so sorry.
Don't think we can take a vote since we don't yet have a motion, Daniela. So
that I won't support.
We hear what you say,
okay.
but
I do want to be part of the vote, but I can't. I have a meeting at 11:30, unfortunately.
Okay, so what time is it now? 11:27. Yeah, so you're kind of stuck. But no, that's fine. We hear what you say, and I think only the members still at the table can actually cast a vote when the question is called.
Okay, I'll leave it on. Maybe I'll leave I'll go on another device for another meeting, and I'll leave it on. So you can
okay, super. Thanks. Okay, Bob. If you unmute yourself, Bob, we'll.
I got it. Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment, and a lot of the comments were on street view, and I think that's very important, particularly along Front Street. But I think possibly a great deal of importance goes over to lake view, and there are some pictures or renderings in the presentation of what it might typically look like from a lake view perspective. And in looking at the renderings on the lake view side of it, I think it has completely lost anything connected to the Heritage District. It's a very nice renderings, but I don't think it has a heritage look at all to it. So those are my comments.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Anybody else want to weigh in? Good, George, please. This helps me to get a sense of where everybody's at. So please don't be afraid to say something. George, off you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I agree completely with what Kathy has to say. I'm glad Kathy said it rather than me, because she put it much better than I could have. But the other point is, and I raised this earlier about the stone and the cladding, it's just not in the district. It just makes no sense. It still bookends the buildings and takes away from the prominence of the house. But let me also say, because I don't want to repeat what everybody else has said, I'm going to vote against this measure too. But let me say one thing, and that is that I'm gratified to hear the comments from the neighbors in the district, because I was involved initially way back in 74, 75 when the committee was then LACAC was put together. We circulated the community. We had overwhelming support eventually to give them the benefit of the merits of a district designation. Since then, the area's changed quite a bit. The residents have changed, and they haven't seemed to pay much attention. So I'm gratified that they've looked again at the plan. They've looked again at the situation that was presented initially, and they're now fully apprised of what's been going on and what should be going on under the guidelines. So let me kind of close on that, but again, reiterate, I agree completely with what Kathy has said. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Anybody else? Yep, Sue, and then Russ.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that I felt that Daniela really expressed the way I feel. I mean, you know, it has to, the community, the neighborhood's not ready for this. And as much as I love it, and I would pass it in many other ways, I really don't think the neighbors are ready. And they are ultimately the folks that will be dealing with this every day, and it affects the way they love their neighborhood and the way they live in their own neighborhood. And for me, the fact that there was 20-something people who raised their hands, when very few people raise their hands these days anyway, spoke a lot to the fact that quite simply the neighborhood's not ready. So, you know, for that reason, although I love it, I'll be voting against it simply because there's such an outpouring of residents who are against it.
Okay, thanks, Sue. Russ?
Just a couple of questions. What are the rights of the owner if we reject this in appeal? And secondly, what are the rights of if we turn it down? What's the owner's rights? If we accept it, what is the community's rights?
Okay, well, first of all, we recommend to council. So council actually does the dirty work at the crossroads. We just simply point them in whatever direction we want to point them. If council accepts it, then that's it. It's done. They get their permits and they go ahead, and there is no process, I don't believe, by which any resident could challenge the issuance of that permit, although you never know these days. If council rejects it, then they have the right to appeal to LPAT. I mean, it's straight to the new and improved Ontario Municipal Board, and they would have a quick hearing in an office or by Zoom. A few dollars would change hands, that is to say, to pay for their time. And they may impose something that none of us likes, because that's what happens when you go to an arbitrator. You end up with nobody being happy. But does that answer your question, Russ?
Yeah, it does. That's fine. Thank you.
Fine, thank you. Anybody else want to weigh in or say anything at this point? Jenny?
I would like to say that everybody's participation today has been tremendously wonderful to see both the input from the community. And I also wanted to say that staff's job in this has been very difficult. They've gone back and forth with the designers and presenting options back and forth. And I think everybody's had a sense of goodwill here. And I would like, you know, in the spirit of, again, a win-win outcome, I would like to propose, if I may, at the right time, Mr. Chair, that we have a motion to defer the decision until our next meeting, when a revised plan can be incorporated, including some of the amendments and changes that we've heard here today. There are two major ones that I can summarize, if I may, at this point. Let me know if this is not the right time, Mr. Chair.
We can hear what the main points are, Jerry. I think just sort of where you're going.
Okay, so I would say that from what I'm hearing, there are two directions to go in this. And one is there's been a pushback to the material of the stone being brought above the ground level, above the baseline. So if there is an opportunity for the designers to go back to the drawing boards in materials only, and in some revisions about breaking up the horizontal block on the east side with, you know, a new articulation of the secondary porch, I think that the committee here would be amenable to seeing that. And the other direction that I'm hearing from all the comments and Councillor Duddex as well is that the second garage on the west side is not something that they can support. So perhaps there are two new proposed options that can be presented. One is incorporating the plan as it is now, but just revising the materiality and some of the aesthetics architecturally. And the other one is to propose a revised design, keeping the garages where they are and doing something else with the addition on the west side. So those are the two directions that I'm hearing that people would be willing to work with the applicant and staff for a positive conclusion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Giddings, I can see a hand. And I think Brenda, I can see a hand. Does that mean you're, gee, I'm getting better at this. So Councillor Giddings first and then Brenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate Jerry's comments. In terms of, I have a very similar motion to what Jerry had penciled out there. In terms of process, Madam Clerk, would you just clarify that we have a staff recommendation before us and that would have to be dealt with first before a alternative motion could be tabled?
I think the chair could probably answer that question for you, that we have a staff recommendation, but it's not a motion. It's just a staff recommendation. So whatever we decide to do, we will express ourselves in the form of a motion, and that motion could be to accept or reject the staff recommendation, or it could be an entirely different motion. But there is no motion before us at the moment until I call it.
Appreciate that, Mr. Chair. Is your preference to defeat the recommendation or introduce an alternative motion?
I will make that clear in my comments when everybody else is finished, Dave. Then it'll be clear what my thinking is and where I think we should probably go, and my sense of where people want to go. So I'll do that in a moment. But we want to hear from Brenda before we go on to do that, if we may. Brenda?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Drew. I just want to say how much I appreciate all the thought that the committee has put toward this project. I think it really shows the diversity of thought, the willingness to find compromise, but also to do what's best for the district and for the town. So I think that is a very important thing that Daniela raised in terms of why are we here, what should we focus on, and what's the long game. In terms of the specifics of this, I do agree that the cladding for the two additions is not appropriate. With the second garage, just given the ability to do everything that could be done through the site plan and the committee of adjustment to find a reasonable parking for this property, given its the setback from Front Street itself. So those are my 2 points on that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Brenda. Is that everybody that wants to have a go? Okay. This has been a great meeting, and in fact, it's been a great process because I've been around this committee a long time, and a reference was made earlier about the importance of heritage in the planning process. I go back to when Harry Barrett and I got an assurance from our current mayor at the beginning of his first term. He said, guys, I will make heritage part of planning in Oakville, and I will provide you with the staff resources to make that happen. And he did. We got Michael Seaman, we got Scott Hanna, who were the original managers who put heritage right into the planning cycle. And I think he hired both of our heritage planning staff who are just super. And the process is so different. And it's been worked on a consultative basis. We start early. This application's been around for a year. We start early. There's discussions with staff. There's the sharing of ideas. Then a subset, 2 or 3 of us go make a site visit. Sometimes we have a Zoom meeting where we look at the revised plans and so on, not to pre-approve anything, but just to give a sense of where it's going and where the hot buttons might be. because the committee is the only place that a decision is actually made. And that process is, I think, designed to get us to a win-win. Getting us to yes, as Daniela says, maybe it's a bit pejorative and it's not quite what we're trying to do, just to cut a deal, but to preserve heritage and to try and temper what people want to do with their homes to keep it within the ambit of heritage, because that's our mandate. Heritage is our mandate. But you know there are areas of taste that pop up from time to time. You could go left, you could go right, and not breach the sanctity of the heritage principles that we're all bound to uphold. My sense here is that this is a good application. I mean, I like the application in general terms. I don't have the problem with the garage on the west because it's set back 20 feet. So that's okay for me. I love the tidying up of the east end. I think it's a heck of a lot better than what we're looking at right now. And to see the two windows up there is really good. I think the big issue for us is the solidity, the heaviness of the stone. This is the jewel. The house is the jewel. And the setting of that jewel, the setting of it can overwhelm it. And that came up in terms of bookends. There was a reference. There's the setting of the jewel is another reference. I think the stone, no one could, the community, I think, was arrested by the stone. I think the whole thing might have had an easier trip through the community process if it hadn't had the stone there. It's just too big, it's just too much. So, and I like the suggestion that Jerry made that if we can sort of set back, and I think Terry in fact picked it up and brought it to us, that if we set back a little bit that porchway or entrance, it breaks the solid line. So that would be helpful too. So what I'm going to suggest, because Councillor Giddings helped us right at the very beginning when he sort of talked about the timeline, Council has to deal with this by July the 19th. We have another meeting on June the 15th. It's quite short notice when you think of the time it takes to manufacture paperwork and get it out. But rather than try and redesign it now, rather than try and have us pass a motion to say that we accept it, provided you set this back and provided you reduce the stone, that's not going to work for me because I need to see it. I need to see what it is. And our job is to deal with this. Our job is not just to kick this up to council. That's not why they give us sticky buns once a year at Christmas time, so that we can kick it up to them to solve it. We have to fix it. We must give council something that it can deal with and intelligently say yes or no, because they can say yes or no. They're allowed to do that most of the time. So what I would want to see in a motion, perhaps, is that we defer this application until our next meeting, at which we would like to see a revised proposal that takes into account the fact that the stone cladding is simply not going to work for us, and that some other softening of the hard lines, perhaps the setting back of the porch, these issues, I'm not so sure. I would be supportive of the garage to the west, but that can come out again a bit in the cladding, just how that appears, how soft it is, how well it blends in. A stone wall is the appearance we've been told it would have, and perhaps that would work. But for me, it's the application as is, pretty well. Softening, but you really need to look at the cladding. So what I would hope is that somebody would perhaps, if they agree with this, give me a motion to defer it to our next meeting, and that would give us the chance to see what changes have been made to reflect, in fact, what we've been pretty consistent about since we first saw it at site plan. Because I think everybody said, gee, the stone's too much at site plan. And we're still there, and we haven't changed. And I don't see any likelihood of the committee approving a motion to accept the staff recommendation at this stage. So rather than just say no and bat it up to council, what I would like to do is defer it to our next meeting, have something in front of us that we can deal with, and refer to council for disposition at its meeting on July the 19th. So if somebody can write that for me, I haven't written it down, Whether Carolyn's been taking notes or whether the secretary has, you'll get it in the sound. If you play it back later, you'll get the sense of it. But if somebody would give me a motion to defer the application in order that we may review a revised application, taking into account the concerns that have been expressed by the committee and the community at the meeting today, I'd be happy to put that to the question. Is somebody going to give me a motion to defer? Russ has given me a motion to defer. Okay, we now have a motion on the floor. So what discussion do we have around that motion? Who wants to speak first? Kathy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. While I was not supportive of going forward with this, I do think this has merit. My only concern is we really have to be specific to the applicant in terms of what our expectations are. I don't want to send them back to the drawing board with, some of us feel strongly about the garage, others don't. I think the overwhelming comment or feeling I'm hearing is the stone issue. That's a done deal. But if there's other aspects that people would like to see coming back, I just don't want it coming back and us saying, oh, wait a minute, you didn't address this. So that's my only concern.
Yes, thank you, Kathy. I was trying to respond to what I was hearing, and I was hearing some people upset about the garage, but I was sensing most people were not. I mean, many said they would accept the application, but understand the need for the community and find themselves that the stone's a little bit heavy. So somebody can correct me, but I'm just trying to play back what I think I'm hearing. So the big things would be the softening of the line and the stone. These are the two big things that would have to be reflected. And you know, the applicant has been listening. If they haven't heard, then it'll make the next meeting difficult. Anybody else wants? George?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I agree completely with Councillor Duddick, and I think that's the way. My proposal would be that's the way we should go forward on this. Thank you.
Okay, Jerry?
I'm sure I understand. Are we asking for the garage not to be included on the west side, or would we accept, for example, that, because I understood that the aesthetics of the driveway on the ground plane would be a distraction to the existing grass area. So what we could propose would be a material suggestion that would be alternative to the asphalt paving. So I'm not sure if we're all on the same page. Do we want the garage on the west side or not? So that would be the question, Mr. Chair.
Yep, and my sense is the garage has majority support. And I think the softening of materials, such as the softening of the driveway, such as the stone, such as the little bit of reveal that you were proposing for the two units to the east, that's where I sense it would be possible to get agreement if these issues were addressed. Now, if everybody says no way we can have the garage in the west, well then that's the direction or advice we would have to give to the applicant. I know this is tough. This is not easy, but we're trying to make this thing something that we can resolve at our next meeting and give council a proper recommendation. Kathy, and then Daniela.
I'll defer to Daniela. She's got another meeting.
Okay, Daniela.
Well, I agree with what you've said, Drew. But ultimately, I don't think we should be definitive on what we're asking for. What we're really saying is come back.
Yeah.
I don't know what that's going to look like. I think that we want something different, and if that meant a 2-car garage on the east side versus what they have, I don't know. So I don't think we should be definitive about how this ends up. I think there's a lot of commentary, softening materials, structure. Let them come back to us, and they do the artistry. So that would be my comment.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm at. That's why I didn't define the garage in any way, saying yes, put it in again. But I was responding to Kathy, and she's not the only one who said the garage is an issue for them. but my sense is come back. But the big issues are the stone and the harshness perhaps from the east, but certainly the stone. Kathy again.
Yes, I fully agree with the comments and we'll stand down.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. So Russ had made that motion, I think. Was it Russ that made it? I've lost track. There's been so many. It was Russ. Okay. So Russ has proposed that the matter be deferred to our next meeting. And we expect the applicant to submit a new application on that date. So our decision is basically to defer to our next meeting. That's it.
Mr. Chairman, yes, on that motion, the motion that's on the floor, like there was some further comment and what you had indicated, and I believe Jerry
The motion wasn't quite on the floor, I don't think, but I understand why you're getting confused. So we'll just make sure that Russ and I think it was Russ who made the motion, that we're on the same page, that basically what we're doing is we're deferring the application until our next meeting, period. That's all we need to say. I think everything that we've said has been heard, and if it hasn't, well, then that'll play out at the next meeting. So the motion is very simple, that the application be deferred until our next meeting.
Mr. Chairman, yes, but there should be a statement or reason why the application is being deferred.
Should there?
Mr. Chair, maybe if we had something whereby the motion is to defer based on the discussions held at this meeting. In other words, it's direction. It's not specific, but it contains that. Okay, I'm happy to take advice on that so that the consideration is deferred. And okay, how do you want to put that? To take account of the concerns that were expressed by the committee at this meeting? Correct. Yeah. Is that okay with you, Madam Secretary?
So this is the motion that's on the floor then?
Yes.
That the application be deferred to the next Heritage Oakville meeting to take into consideration the comments that were heard at this meeting.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Gittings, did you want to speak again?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I just want to clarify that in the interest of the turnaround time, we aren't looking for additional feedback on some of the items, including trees or windows or other items that as of right, the applicant is allowed to do, that we're going to have a fairly narrow focus in terms of the stone cladding or whatever else might be of mind. I agree that it would be helpful if we included those, just so when the proponent comes back, they can be focused. If there is a brief wish list.
Yep. And I didn't really hear anybody say anything about the trees. I think we accept that the tree, that the bylaw permits the trees to be taken down. It's on private property. I didn't hear any concern about that. I haven't heard concern about, we can't have a concern about the material for the new windows because that's within our own guidelines. So that's not an issue that we need to get excited about again. I think we've narrowed
Fair
it.
enough. I'm always
concerned
in terms of feedback and frustrations from residents. So just what we can do to provide clarity would be appreciated.
Yeah. No, we'll always act within our own guidelines. Is everybody? So I think that was Russ's motion, which we've massaged a bit to try and clarify. And I'm sure Terry understands every word, and so does Carolyn, of where the committee is coming from and what it hopes to see. Because we want a win-win here. We want the new neighbour to come in and to love even more the wonderful home that they bought and the beautiful location they bought, and to love and be loved by their neighbors. I mean, not this is not a confrontation or a fight that they're going to have with Jane or with any of them. This is a process, and there are new people coming in. We want this to be win-win, consistent with the proper application of heritage principles. So if there's no further discussion on that, is there anyone? Okay, Brenda?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just would like clarification as to the specific wording of the motion. Again, if it could be read out, because I've heard a couple iterations and I don't want to vote and then go, oh, that's not what I thought. I'd rather hear the motion once again.
Yeah. Jill, can you read it out again?
Mr. Chairman, going with the motion as refined, as you indicated, and that the application be deferred to the next Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee meeting to take into consideration the concerns that were heard at this meeting.
Is that fine, Brenda?
I think I would like to echo what Councillor Giddings said. I think you need a little bit of specificity. Otherwise, I would be sitting there and saying, what are you asking me to do? So I would like to see something that says respond to the feedback received, specifically the meeting regarding cladding and the setback line. Narrow it down. What are we looking for? I think if you leave it too open, number one, it's not clear. And number two, we may not get what we want, and the proponent may be wasting their time and not get where they want, and then we end up in a bad situation in July.
Yeah, I hear that. I mean, I don't think that's going to happen. I think everybody understands what's expected here, but that wording you gave us, you've got it written down there. Can you read it to me?
Sure. I move to defer the application to the next meeting of the Oakville Heritage Committee, correct name, to enable the proponent to respond to the feedback received at this meeting, specifically regarding cladding and the setback line.
Russ, does that meet your Jerry?
Just to be clear, the setback line is not a plan line, so it would be the setback of the facade fascia.
Yep. Okay, can we put that in? I hate doing this. I like to have a motion, that is nice and clear when we're kind of constructing it as a group, and it's hard because there's so much in it. I mean, we don't want to try and go through everything that we've heard today and put it in a motion, but these are the clear elements that I'm hearing are consistently going to stop the application being approved by a majority on the committee. That's what I'm hearing. George.
Mr. Chair, I think speaking of specificity, I think there's been enough discussion and concern voiced at this meeting today by residents and others concerning that garage to the west. So I think that should be in there as well.
I hear that, George, but I wasn't going to put it in because...
well, she wanted specificity.
Yeah, but I was not going there because I don't think I heard from the committee that a majority was opposed to the garage in the west.
Well, maybe you need a vote then.
Okay. Is that what?
Doesn't mean they can't take it into consideration to decide to leave it the way they want, but they should take another look at it.
Okay.
In the expectation there'll be comments at the next meeting.
Okay. So, I mean, I'm the chair. I don't make the motion, but what I'm trying to do is to get us to a conclusion here. So we're saying here's our resolution. That this is consistent, that the matter be deferred, the application be deferred until our next meeting. Right? That's what we're saying. We then said, well, we ought to tell them what we expect to see from them. Why are we doing that? Okay, so the next concern is, in order that a revised application can be presented, which takes into account concerns expressed with respect to the cladding, And what was your word, Jerry? It's not set back?
It's 12 o'clock.
With respect to the cladding and...
The setback of the fascia,
Right, with respect to the cladding and the setback of the fascia on the structure at the east side of the property. Okay. And am I now hearing we want them to go back and think about the garage again? Councillor Kitting, Duddock, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do think that should be captured. And again, as Jerry indicated, they may very well come back with something that for the majority addresses the concerns of the additional garage, whether it's not having paving, not, you know, in other words, it's an issue.
Yes. Yes. But I think, and the suggestion about the paving there would be a good one. It can
and that's why I'm saying, you know, let them know that the garage is an issue, how they deal with it.
Okay, so here are the three parts. Now, Joel should be taking this down, or somebody should be taking this down. So here's the motion. One, that the consideration of the application be deferred to our next meeting. Two, that we expect at the next meeting to see a revised application which takes account of the issues raised with respect to the cladding and the fascia setback and the elements of the garage to the west. I use the word elements of the garage to the west, which could mean should it be there at all, or how do you soften it? Does that make it clear?
Yep.
Is that good for you, George?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Right. Okay. Russ, if that's your motion now, we've in a friendly manner amended it 27 times, but it's friendly amendments. So that's the issue. That's the motion. Anyone opposed to that motion? Seeing none, the motion is carried. Thank you, folks. This has been a really good meeting. I've enjoyed every minute of it. Our next item is a good news story. And I don't know.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. And I'm not sure if is Susan going to be here or is Carolyn going to handle this one?
I am here, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, it's just after 12 and the committee normally goes until 12:30. There is another meeting, so we have until 12:45 at the latest.
Oh, I'm sure we're there. Okay, Sue, you just heard the time limit that you've got, but it's a lovely good news story. Let's all feel nice about it. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. They're just going to pull up the presentation here for me. This will be a relatively short presentation. It is a good news story. First, I'll finish on today. And there isn't really any decision to be made. This is just an opportunity to share feedback that is not the end of this project. And so what we're here to just quickly look at is a new project that's being proposed for Shipyard Park. Next slide, please. And so Shipyard Park is part of the town lands that are located on the west side of Oakville Harbor. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to go and see the wonderful work that the town has done in Tannery Park, which is located just south of this area. So Tannery Park is kind of the outer harbor, and then the area in the inner harbor here is called Shipyard Park. And so we're looking at a specific section of Shipyard Park where Parks and Open Space staff have reached out to heritage staff and also to the community on a new project that will be both functional and commemorative. Next slide, please. So you could see in my previous slide there, that image of Shipyard Park, it's right underneath the Lakeshore Road Bridge. It's an underutilized area of the park. I would note right now that Shipyard Park is is coming up for the same kind of lovely treatments that Tannery Park has seen over the past couple of years. And there will be a future heritage permit for the entire Shipyard Park area. But what we're here to talk about today is this smaller section of Shipyard Park where we're looking at introducing a shade structure with seating and commemorative potential. And so these images are taken from a concept presentation that's been prepared by Parks and Open Space staff and also shared with several members of the community and community groups, including staff from the Oakville Museum and also the Canadian Caribbean Association of Halton as well. And so what we're looking at doing here is creating more visual interest in this particular area of Shipyard Park, but also making it practical too by providing shade structures in an area that's very open and seating areas as well. And then giving it interest by including historic images, plaques, and commemoration. And so the suggestion from Parks and Open Space staff is that the heritage component of this site could be related to celebrating Oakville's Black heritage. Next slide, please. And so in your package, there are some really, these are high-level concept ideas. These are examples of what some other parks and municipalities have done for seating and for shade structure canopies. This is not exactly what's being proposed for this site, but it gives you an idea of what we're looking at in terms of making sure that we've got functional seating, but also interesting canopy structures that provide shade so that this makes it a more inviting area as well. Next slide, please. Again, here are some more of those kind of concepts of what could, what canopy structures could look like, so that we're not just doing a typical standard park pavilion. We're creating something that has a lot of visual interest, but would also be tailored to specifically fit into this area of Shipyard Park. Next slide, please. And so this is a very high level sketch of that area of Shipyard Park, where we're looking at including area for seating on a couple of levels. Inside that circular area would potentially be room for performance spaces. And then there would be commemorative panels as well. And again, this is obviously, you can see, it is just a hand-drawn sketch. This is a very early stage of the process, and we're here to just get some ideas from Heritage Oakville. Next slide, please. This is that sketch done up with a little bit more detail so that you can see where potential locations of shade structures would kind of fit in with the both fixed seating as well as potential chairs that could be moved around as needed. And then as well, you can see interpretive panels that actually border the site as well. Next slide, please. And here's just another image of that. Paving materials would generally be matching what's already been used in the Tannery Park area, so that there is design continuity running throughout the entire site. But as I say, the seating and the shade structure designs are still a quite high-level concept. Next slide, please. And here we've got more of a ground level view, looking in from the water area towards this particular seating area. Next slide, please. And these are the types of commemorative plaques that could potentially be used in the area. These are, you can see the shipbuilding plaques are examples that exist throughout the Tannery Park area, but it doesn't mean that we have to go for that particular plaque style exactly. There's also the weathered kind of metal plaque that could be used. And the idea is that these plaques would tell the story of Oakville's history with the Underground Railroad and celebrating Oakville's Black heritage. Next slide, please. And so That's one of the reasons why park staff have already reached out to the Oakville Museum, because they do have a wonderful exhibit on Oakville's Black history, as well as reaching out to some of our community partners, including the Canadian Caribbean Association of Halton, who are being consulted on. They've seen a version of this presentation, and they'll be providing their own separate feedback as well to park staff too. Next slide, please. And this is just an example. These are symbols that are associated with the Underground Railroad. And so this was just kind of one of the design ideas that could potentially be incorporated into the site in some particular way. We thought it was quite interesting. And so any use of those symbols would happen with, close feedback from our partners with the Canadian Caribbean Association and anybody else who wants to be involved. Next slide, please. And so generally what we're looking for your feedback on, if you have any high level kind of questions about what we should consider the impact on heritage attributes, because this is part of our Oakville Harbor cultural heritage landscape. I can tell you right now that staff haven't flagged any particular issues with potential impact on heritage attributes, but if the committee has suggestions, I'm happy to hear them. If you've got suggestions about the commemoration concept that we've been discussing, or anything else you'd like to suggest about design or usability for the site, we're happy to receive that information from you. You can present it either today during the meeting. If you think about it additionally and want to send feedback after the meeting, I'm happy to receive additional feedback via email too. Next slide, please. And so the recommendation before you today is simply to receive the report, and we'll just be taking notes of some of your comments today. I think that's it for the presentation, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Hey, thank you. I'm excited about it. I hope the price of lumber has come down before we try and put in all these benches, otherwise there might have a cost overrun. Okay, Councillor Duddock is first up.
Thank you.
And then
thank you, Mr. Chair. Two things that come to mind. First, I guess I want confirmation this is not in lieu of the Underground Railway tribute or memorial that we have in Burnett Park. This is in addition to, is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So yes, they are entirely separate projects. There has been some suggestion that some of the stone from the Burnett House salvage could potentially be reused if there is additional stone in the Oakville Harbor project. The problem is right now that the Burnett Park project doesn't have budget approval. Although I would note, I don't think this one does either. And so,
no.
It's all a matter of funding really, but it's not the intention to replace one with the other. I mean, there's certainly many stories of Oakville's Black heritage that we can tell. And even if the Burnett Park goes ahead, I still think that it would be wonderful to reference that project in the Oakville Harbor so that we can direct people over to Burnett Park as well to see more. So
that was exactly my concern, was given the close proximity to 104 Burnett and the fact the stone had come from that home that was the Underground Railroad site, that has importance there. I agree with adding on to it. I guess my other concern is, are we restricting ourselves just to the Black heritage? Why are we not incorporating Indigenous, some of the harbor aspects in some of these panels? Like, does it always have to be just one particular history? In other words, it's very diverse. Why could we not have different panels celebrating each aspect?
That's some excellent feedback. I'll note it.
Okay.
I would say that there is some Indigenous commemoration in the Tannery Park area already.
Okay. Just to confirm, we don't lose sight of that, because some people may not go down to Tannery. They wonder why there isn't something, especially along the banks of the 16 Mile, it's quite well known that that would be a site where people would congregate. The only other thing I would suggest is to have park staff be mindful of the log cabin, that the sight lines are still maintained, because I don't want it orphaned as a result of something that the canopies or that, or preventing people from seeing it from the harbor, from the pedestrian realm. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Kathy. Carrie, you've moved. Off you go. You're still muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have a wonderful shipbuilding, and obviously the name of the park is Shipyard Park. We have a wonderful shipbuilding heritage in that harbor. I just think it would be nice to reflect that in those shade structures. So rather, I know they were just concepts, but rather than something modern, I think it would be nice if the shade structures mimic sails. And I think that speaks also to the Underground Railroad, as all of those people came, or primarily came by ship. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good, thank you, Carrie. Any other comments? Yes, Bob, and then Jerry.
Yes, thank you. I just, I'll pick up a little bit on what Carrie had said. That area has just up towards the mouth of the creek, it has the Oakville Club and look and feel, a historic look and feel of the Oakville Club. Across the way from that is a sailing club, and that certainly has not quite as historic, but it's got a look and feel to it. And up towards that proposal, of course, is also the lighthouse that has certainly a look and feel to it. And then continuing up yet again, of course, as Carrie said, is the log cabin, and or Councillor Giddings, Beddock said that. So anyway, just to make sure that it all ties in rather well, as opposed to here are these pieces, and then here's another piece, and does it really tie in? So those are my comments.
Good comments, Bob. Thank you. And then Jerry.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Susan. This is wonderful that it's coming forward, and I would say it's about time. I've walked that area many times and always found that it just kind of, the experience drops off when we get to that little area of the park. And I would like to echo the previous comments about the aesthetics of the those beautiful evocative images, that they be innovative and contextual to the shipyard aesthetic and to the history of the community. And I would also like to add that I know you touched on it in your presentation, Susan, the opportunity to place more memorial benches for the community to sponsor for various reasons. I know that they're quite popular, and I've tried to get one or two myself unsuccessfully, but I am on a waiting list. And I do love what we see here in the images, and I hope that the final end result will have those lovely shade structures that are innovative and contextual. Thank you.
Bob mentioned the lighthouse, and that's something I think we should keep in mind, because I go back to the story of how it got there. Harry Barrett was mayor, and Garth Bramall, who was also on this committee, he was the harbour master. And Harry got a call one day from the feds to say that they were going to put a new light at the end of the pier. The aid to navigation in form of a light, which was there before, was being replaced with something more modern. And they were going to be out there next week. And Harry said, "Oh, what are you going to do with the old lighthouse?" "Oh," he said, "we're just going to toss it." He said, "If it wasn't there when you arrived, would that cause you any problem?" "No, that would be great." So Harry then gets on the phone to Garth Bramall. The two of them get a working party together. They lift the damn thing off onto a float. They float it up the creek and pull it out where it now sits. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that went on those days. You just couldn't believe it. So I think we should probably honour that, or reflect it, or put the story on one of the panels. How did the lighthouse get here when it used to be up there? Anyway, any other comments for Sue? Kerry and Dave?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to make a comment that that the fact that this is still a working harbor. So there is tugboats that are tied up there in the wintertime, which frankly, I used to overlook them in the wintertime, and I enjoyed, frankly, seeing our colorful tugboats. And that it's also obviously for docking for sailboats. So in particular, to make sure that nothing is put in the way of it being a working harbor, that tugboats get adequate space, I guess, around the dock for them for what they need to do. And so primarily, I guess I would say from the position of the commemorative plaques, that's kept in mind for both docking sailboats as well as the tugboats.
Yes, thanks, Carrie. And I thought that when I saw it, because I used to tie my boat up right there. And I don't know if I would want to tie it up there right now if it goes ahead. But anyway, that's another issue. Okay, Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm incredibly supportive of Councillor Duddock's comments in terms of recognition for the Indigenous peoples, where that was a very important gathering place. Thrilled to see that it's going to be flood resistant. I take it that won't be a waterproof coating. That'll be a rising of the level like was done at Tannery Park. Looking forward to see how the Lion Cabin or the Vernerville Cabin, I guess more properly, is going to be dealt with and tied in. I think it calls out for, as many of us have seen around the world, the sail type of roof covering that will fit in very well and pay tribute to part of our past. In terms of signage, I'd love to see something in the balcony that Ward 2 shares with Ward 3, right in the middle of 16 Mile Creek, in terms of a map of the area and something interpretive there to draw people down as people are walking along the bridge from east to west or west to east, to give them a bit of a tease, to get them to go down to the flats. Incredibly exciting project. And will you keep the committee up to date, Susan, in terms of the public consultations that'll be upcoming?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, definitely. If I hear any public consultation dates, I'll be sure to send them along. I've been taking notes on everybody's comments. This is some great feedback. One thing I do want to highlight is just some of the amazing stuff that's happened in Tannery Park through the Moccasin Identifier project, which is a tremendous partnership project. I believe through the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation. Anyway, it's resulted in, I think, a rather large kind of mural in the Tannery Park area that explains part of the area's Indigenous history, and it'd be wonderful if we can kind of bring that into the entire harbor area as well. So I'll certainly be passing along all of these suggestions. This is great.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Okay, super. Councillor Duddock?
I'd love to move receipt.
Thank you. So we've got our comments. Sue's got our comments. The motion is that we receive the information.
Mr. Chair, I believe Brenda had a comment.
Okay. Off you go, Brenda.
You're muted, Brenda.
You're muted.
Thank you. It's the phrase of the decade. Just to comment on the flood resilience point, I do know that in that last major flood that we had, that they had to put barriers, sandbagging and things around the log cabin there. And I do wonder if it needs to either be raised or and I know Councillor Duddock spoke about the sight lines, but it does seem to be in a rather low and exposed location given our recent flooding experience. So I just express a concern that it would survive another flood. Okay, good. So you've got that, Sue? Yep. Okay, so the motion on the floor is we receive the information, we receive the report. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, the motion is carried.
Our next meeting, and I know you can't wait to have yet another meeting, is on Tuesday the 15th. Everybody will get due notice at the proper time. I would like to thank everybody who's worked so hard today, and for Jill, I mean, this is not your usual meeting. You've had to stick handle a lot of stuff coming in, and our heritage planners, so you got it easy today, but Carolyn had to really work for her paycheck today. So thank you all again for good discussion, and wasn't it good to, sometimes you can get fed up, community people get in the way. No, they don't. When you really get to it, it's just wonderful to hear so many people who really love where they are, where they live, and want to support the community. Anyway, that being said, motion to adjourn. Good, George. George wants to help us out the door.
I just want to commend you on your chairmanship today. A very complex, difficult meeting, and I really want to commend you because you handled it very well, and I think we're all appreciative of it. Thank
George,
you.
Thank you, George. That I really appreciate that coming from all of you. It was certainly not one of my easier meetings. Let's hope next time everything goes smoothly, right? Okay, so that's it. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.